You have a cat. Careful. I'm live, Mom. Thanks. Sorry. That's okay. And that's my mother for you people. Hey y'all, it's Becky here from the Beckisphere, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, I'm Becky, and every Monday and Thursday, with possibly some bonuses sprinkled in here and there, I am here for you to talk about the climate. So if that interests you, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button, click the like, and enjoy this second week of the Climate Book Club. So every week on Thursday at 6 p.m. Standard Pacific Time, or Pacific Standard Time, which way do you say it?
PST, Pacific Standard Time.
Pacific Standard Time. Again, my mom is the voice from the side.
Beyond.
The voice beyond and the hand. Yeah, so I am here for you every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, because every week we talk about the next several chapters of a book that we're reading that has to do with the climate. And the book this time is Don't Even Think About It by George Marshall. So if you haven't gotten your copy yet and this would be something you're interested in, then go ahead and get a copy. There will be a link below in the description to purchase your own copy. So we already went through chapters 1 through 3 last time, and that was mostly just an introduction talking about how people that have experienced climate change-based disasters are less likely to actually connect it to climate change. It seems like it's a lot having to do with more of the humanities side of, the community all came together, which is great, and focusing on short-term rather than long-term. So that was one of the main things that was talked about, I think.
Yeah.
Is there any other main point that...
That was the thing that stood out to me.
Yeah, that was the thing that stood out to me too. So that was what probably stood out to those that were there. But yeah. Okay, so now we are moving on to chapter 4. And chapter 4 is called You Never Get to See the Whole Picture, How the Tea Party Fails to Notice the Greatest Threat to Its Values. And that's an intriguing title. So Mom and I were really excited to read that one because we were like, oh, that sounds like throwing shade. I don't know. It's really interesting. And what's interesting is, I mean, almost all of us, I'm sure, have relatives that see on the opposite political side as you. And so we being more not Trump, I guess. I don't mean to polarize, but we believe in climate change, and we have relatives that are less convinced, as it were. And what's interesting is that there seems to be a connection between people who don't want to accept that climate change is happening and people that don't want to accept how bad the pandemic is right now. So it was interesting because the way that in chapter 4 it was described that what people thought from the climate change problem is that it was just more, if you hear
It's the dog, go ahead.
It's the dog. If you were to actually just hear what people that don't necessarily believe in climate change would think, it sounds very similar to those who also don't believe in the virus being a bad thing. And one of the parts that Marshall said in this book is, it was soon clear that climate change, or rather the narrative that they had constructed around it, they being climate deniers, fit perfectly into a set of pre-existing ideological grievances about the distribution of power. The word they kept using was control. James said carbon is a universal element that the government wants to control. Dennis added that climate change is a convenient crisis. The government is using this as a tool of control. And that's interesting because that's almost conspiratorial a little bit, that the government has construed something so elaborate and has convinced 99.9% of scientists all to go along with this idea that we are currently on the wrong trajectory with our planet. Like, nobody wants to move things around. Nobody wants to, you know, feel like their livelihood is getting abrupted. And that also has to do with climate scientists. Like, we would love for this not to happen. You know, scientists and those who believe in the environment, I mean, we're not just trying to be, I don't know, like obnoxious because we'd like to, you know. I would much rather this not be a problem. I guess little side note is, for the longest time I actually really did ignore the problem of climate change. I interned at the Monterey Bay Aquarium in high school and stuff. And that was one of the topics that was brought up a lot, of course, was climate change, because it has a lot to do with how the oceans work, and it impacts the ocean and marine biology a lot. So it was a topic that was extremely hard to avoid. But I did my best because it was scary. And I really didn't want to focus on that topic. I wanted to study jellyfish and cnidarians, which is like jellyfish and coral and anemones, near hydrothermal vents deep down in the ocean. I wanted to study deep sea ecology. I didn't want to have anything to do with like air-sea interaction, like, you know, I didn't want to have to do with any of those climate topics. But then going into college, one of my roommates was an environmental studies person, and, you know, she was just like, you know what? You can't be ignoring this stuff. Like, you can't. Like, it's impossible. It's the way it is. You have to just accept that it's happening and decide if you want to do something about it. And she was right. I was just, you know, I was stalling in it. It was a topic that I just couldn't avoid. And the more I learned about it, the more drastic I felt I needed to act. And it just, now it's my life. So trust me when I say that a lot of people that go into this topic, it's depressing to us too. You know, we don't like it. We don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I feel like that's the same thing as in the pandemic, how Fauci's feeling. Like, he doesn't want to be the bearer of bad news. He doesn't want to ruin your party. Like, it's not fun being on the side of the person saying there's a problem. It's never fun. But that doesn't mean it's not happening. And you can be pissed at the messenger, but it doesn't make it go away. Mm-hmm. So I went on a bit of a rant, but that was some parts in my mind that I was going through when I was hearing stuff about this being like the government wants to use it as a method of control and that kind of thing. And I was just like, no, it's too complicated. You make the government seem a lot more put together than it is. Like, you make it seem a lot more fast acting than it is. Yeah. Like, why is the government good at doing stuff that's so conspiratorial and against everyone and able to do it so secretly and quickly? But then when it comes to just regular livelihood
passing
stuff,
legislation.
Exactly, passing legislation, just like anything else, it's just like, oh man, it's too hard. You know, it takes 8 years to get through anything. It's funny. Like, yeah. Okay. Anyways, rant over. Cheers. Have your own tea or beverage that would make you feel better about this. I'm talking to no one, by the way. It's literally just us.
That's okay. You know what? There's a presidential debate happening right now too. And so there might be a little bit of competition. Okay, I know this is more important, but okay. Now, moving on.
And for the record, 1, I voted a vote. And 2, we taped the debate, so we will watch it later.
Yes.
So it's still happening. But yeah, okay. But we really wanted to talk about this book. And hopefully then some people are going to read it afterwards. So we're going to...
It's really good. What page are you on?
I'm on page 18. So here. And then I went on that rant. Let's see. So yeah. So one of the other things that was talked about was that in the same idea that the government was using it as a tool of control, there was also that argument that it was just Agenda 21.
I'd never heard of that.
I had never heard of that, but apparently it's the constitution for the one world government. So it was the 1992 UN Conference on Environment and Development had put together sustainability goals for the countries and stuff to start moving towards a more environmental existence. And Tea Partiers then said that agenda 21 is basically a constitution for a one world government. So they're arguing that because countries want to work together to deal with environmental issues.
Any collaboration then is one
any
world
collaboration. Exactly. Any collaboration is no-go. We love using Netflix from other countries, but don't you dare talk about policy between them. So that's another one that's bizarre in my mind. And I feel bad because I feel like I'm polarizing those sides and stuff. But I'm going to skip a little further ahead because the statistic, climate deniers like to think that they have a huge amount of influence, right? I mean, they have a lot of influence, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of like how the 1% has a ton of influence, right? Like they have the money to talk about it, but in reality, only 7% of the US population are climate deniers. It's 7%. And for some reason in our political world, we are acting like it's 40%, like it's 50%. It's not even the difference between how many people want Roe v. Wade, that's at least closer to the center. No, it's 7%. It's a tiny, tiny percentage. And yet we are still pandering to that 7% by making it seem like it's still an argument.
So I don't understand why. And I'm not sure we have it yet from the book.
I don't think we have it yet. My speculation as to why is because fossil fuel companies have a lot of money to pump into the government.
Okay, so it's a power and a money thing.
Exactly. It's that you're able to make your voice louder when you have more money. And that's why I compared it to the 1%, because it's basically the same thing. You have big fossil fuel companies that don't want the country to move away from fossil fuel. And if I'm sounding conspiratorial right there, video on Monday. I got some sources for you. But yeah, the fossil fuel companies, I think it's really the main reason why that topic is so hostile still, even though it is arguably more consent. I was going to say consensual. That's not the right word. It has more of a consensus than most other topics. Even in the scientific community, it has more consensus than topics in the scientific community. And those people are sticklers,
Yeah.
So other things that are a little more leeway or whatever, for example, even the flu shot has a lesser percent chance of working. They're less confident about the flu shot than they are about climate is changing. Get your flu shot. I already talked about it in a separate video. That was not saying you shouldn't get your flu shot, but I think that's really interesting. I'm just trying to make comparisons to make people realize it's such a small percent of people that actually don't believe that. Most people do, but because we think that it is such a big topic and such a big percent of people think that there's a big percent of people that don't believe it's true, then it doesn't feel comfortable talking about it.
No, can I mention here something that occurred to me was that a lot of the politicians don't want to call themselves environmentalist. They want to somehow shroud their tacit approval of climate change in some other terminology so they don't get lumped in with environmentalists.
They're almost going back to global warming, funny enough. I feel like more people in the conservative aisle say global warming than climate change and vice versa.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know why that is. But yeah, I mean, okay, so I also still kind of moving away from the book a little bit, but just there are many different ways and arguments for how to deal with the issue. I feel like that really is more of a point of contention, but because we're not even feeling comfortable talking about it being an issue, we haven't really been able to address those different ideas as much. So, for example, I am also working on a video to talk about the difference between the Green New Deal and Biden's plan. And one of the main differences that I see is that Biden's plan talks about nuclear.
Oh.
Green New Deal, very much against nuclear. So that's an example of, and what's interesting is that Republicans generally like nuclear because hypothetically it can survive better in a free market economy and such. Like I'll do a whole video talking about that, but it's interesting because there is political division on how best to deal with the issue, whether or not to make it a centralized government issue or to make it more of a decentralized free market based solution, you know? So that is a very contested. But we can't even get to that contestation because we have still that other barrier of whether or not people should even talk about it. And I feel like that barrier needs to be overcome if we are actually going to find what the best solution is to solve the problem, not just the politically accurate solution, you know? Like, what if nuclear is great? There's such a divide in the environmental movement towards nuclear that people won't talk about it. There was a TEDx, or not TEDx, there was a environmental law conference at University of Oregon, and there was a keynote speaker that came in, and he was pro-nuclear, and there was literally protests outside of the EMU because that's how pissed off environmentalists get. Some environmentalists get towards the pro-nuclear talk. I would love to have those conversations, though. I want that to be the thing we're arguing about, you know? I want people to have more opinions on that topic. But we can't even get to that.
Yeah.
Which is why we're reading this book, and I will get right back to it. But I'm in a ranty mood today. I have a lot of points. I've been watching too much Netflix.
It's a good book.
Not Netflix. Yeah, seriously? Good book. Really good book. I love his writing style. Can we just talk about that for a sec? Like, the way that he goes between anecdotes and actual, like, facts and, like, news relevancy, it's really well done. And he has a little bit of, you know, like, personality humor in there. Like, again, this is going to be such a depressing topic, but, like, he makes it really casual. Yeah. And he has good context, too. I mean, yeah. Okay, so the second point. Huh?
Go ahead.
Okay. So, I mean, did we already talk about this? Oh, well, I mean, okay, it's in the same sort of perspective of...
What page are you on?
19.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So... the people can follow along, the hypothetical people. So, okay. So on chapter 19, then we get to talking about how, again, Tea Partiers like to argue that the government's always lying. But what was interesting in my mind was then he compared Tea Partiers to environmentalists and talked about in what ways they were similar. For example, both of them were passionate about their topic. Both of them kind of have we're the minority, like it's us versus them sort of mentality a little bit, because I think environmentalists, I mean, we feel often like very, very targeted and stuff. And so that's, it turns into more of a us versus them sort of perspective. Both of them feel that the media is not doing a good job covering their topics. another video that's on the way. I was just talking with my mom about talking about distrust media. We'll get to it. Give me some more subscribers though, and that would help. Thank you. I again am talking to no one. Yeah, sure. Okay. But yeah, so like for example, he gave an example of the Keystone XL pipeline and how it was opposed by both environmentalists and Texan Tea Partiers for different reasons, but they had that common ground, which was really interesting. So the environmentalists didn't like it because it contributed to the carbon economy, so it produced more CO2. And the Tea Partiers didn't like it because it would require land to be seized from property owners, so it would take away that individuality aspect. And man, I want to go on another tangent. My other tangent is just that it's really interesting how environmentalism is directly associated with strong government, because I feel like it could be a very easy argument to go, you can easily go off the grid. I mean, you can't easily go off the grid. We'll talk about having the ability to or not, like that's kind of like privilege. But like you can easily go towards like decentralization method. Like you can make it be a very individual sort of thing. So I don't know why it's always connected. I mean, it's connected even more now because frankly, we haven't moved people in the right direction for it to be an individual movement. And instead, like we're running out of time, so it needs to be more of a government standpoint. Okay, that rant was over.
What chapter are you on?
So now I'm on chapter 5. And chapter 5 is called Polluting the Message, How Science Becomes Infected with Social Meaning. And he starts to talk about, he compares it to different other topics that are very polarizing. So it's kind of funny because that was kind of what I was talking about last week, right? So he compared it to like the animal video to a climate change based video, and how like the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's YouTube channel, it's minuscule, like no one watches it. And scientists really don't have a very good time at like marketing themselves, which is very true. And so that makes it really difficult for scientific perspectives and actual facts to like be disseminated into the media world. And then he also talks about, he compares the climate change messaging then to gun control, and how even though in a poll in West Virginia, 65% of people wanted more gun control, 85% of people knew that you couldn't trust politicians who say they want gun control. So
it's bizarre.
It's so bizarre. It's like, I feel like the world's overthinking. But it's interesting because it's like you want a problem to go away, but you don't want the umbrella of power and leadership to take over for that purpose, because I feel like they get the impression that once you have that power, they're not going to pull back. So there's like a major distrust in like the government in being able to insert themselves in certain ways and then pull themselves back out.
Not everybody's George Washington.
Right.
In that George Washington gave up and did not want to become king.
And he put in certain terms. Yeah, he put in.
He pulled back. He said, this is not what our country is about. It is not a kingdom.
Yeah.
It is a presidency, and I will pull back so that somebody else can step up.
That was a guy that knew his history, so he didn't repeat it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he compared George Washington, not Washington. Then he compared it to climate change to people's resistance to vaccinations. And that topic, especially, with what's going on right now, is, I'd say, the most similar to how climate change and climate scientists are feeling, because it is literally, again, an example of science being distrusted.
Yeah, here's the science, but
here's the science, but we're going to listen to this tiny paper say something that's completely different than everyone else. And for some reason, they have the same amount of weight. Yeah. Which, you know, basically, like he was talking about how in Britain, there was that single paper in 1998 that compared people that got vaccinations and then equated to getting autism, children getting autism. And that paper was quickly disproven, but it has still impacted us now. And I was 1 year old, you know, like that's how big it is impacted. I don't know life where people didn't mistrust vaccines, you know, like that's beyond me. So he did basically, again, similar to what we were talking about last week, which is he compared it to other issues. And it kind of then talks about like what the stereotypes are and how if you believe in climate change, then you must also believe these other ideologies, like it's put into a category, and people can't move from those two-party categories. They can't switch between one and the other. You can't be pro-life and believe in climate change. You know, you can't vaccinate your children and also want guns. You know, like for some reason, those things are inherently attached, and that is part of the reason why it's been really hard to move away from it being political. And what was interesting, and this was a hey yell to my feminists out there, but also just in general, he said that people that believe in climate change, he calls them homo credians. He tried to make it sophisticated. Are most likely to be middle-aged, college-educated liberal Democrats, and women are more likely to be believers in climate change, which is consistent with observation that women tend to be responsive to other health, safety, financial, and ethical risks, which honestly makes a lot of sense. I mean, yeah, that just makes sense because we've been raised to take care of the family and stuff. Like, so it's kind of ingrained in our mind from a young age to focus on safety in a way.
Preserve the community.
Yeah, preserve the community. Yeah. So basically the moral of the story on that one is we need more women in politics. And there is actually a connection between educating women and family planning to decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. Interesting. Another video. Another one. I know. I have so many I want to talk about. And on the contrary, homo negators, which are the unconvinced on climate change, are almost always strongly conservative in politics. Very few are not, and tend to be from a more affluent and powerful social groups. They are likely to be men and may display a low risk or a low level of risk perception in other areas. This is familiar with the group. This is a familiar group to risk researchers who have named the white man effect after the danger men in this group can seriously distort their social research. Yeah. I think that's why they have higher insurance rates too. Car insurance rates. Yeah, I'm not going to suss that out. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know what the reasoning of that might be, and I'm not going to put my conjecture together on that one. But I found that interesting. I don't know what else to say besides that part. Okay, and so now we're on to chapter 6, and chapter 6 is called The Jury of Our Peers, How We Follow the People Around Us. And this was also very interesting because it talked about the bystander effect, which I've heard about that one before. I think that's a pretty common one to hear about, which is basically if you see something bad happening, you assume someone else is around you is going to act on it. They'll be more knowledgeable about it, all that kind of stuff. And so you don't feel the need to actually act. And as a result, sometimes nothing happens. And that is definitely something that is happening in climate change for sure. I mean, especially with people putting all the pressure on individual action, that leads to a lot more people giving up and just being like, this is impossible. Like, I can't do this in my lifestyle. So therefore someone else has got to fix the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another video I want to do is on individual impact versus systemic change. I need to make a list. Somebody make a list in the comment section, please. Okay, so that's chapter 6, and so that was one of the first things he talked about was the bystander effect, and he also mentioned, which I found interesting, that the social conformity is not a preference or choice. So that's another thing, is we can get bogged down and blame each other and stuff for going with our peers or our family members on certain perspectives. But honestly, like, until you go out and you differentiate your social circle, that's just how it's going to be. And it's not necessarily saying anything having to do with your education or intelligence or anything. It's just kind of how humans are wired. Like, they want to be included in the group, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I found that almost nice to know that's out of my hands a little bit, if that makes sense. But also we need to get better at critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's important to second guess your own biases and opinions, and to do your own research, using reputable sources, and to not get into that problem where you think that the worldview of the people closest to you is the most thought out worldview,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So that again leads me to where he was talking about how the Tea Party members and environmental activists share that distrust in mainstream media and depend on information sources that speak specifically to their interests and values, which is true. One of the reasons why I started this YouTube channel is I'm hoping to make environmental content more mainstream. But by doing so, I mean, obviously I'm becoming an environmental channel. So maybe that's backfiring, because then I will be just another place where people can go to for their niche needs. But what's interesting is that, like, you can't find a lot of environmental information. It's not talked about often as it should be in any way. I mean, it's really underrepresented news. And so you do have to go to particular sources to find that information in the first place. Like, Climate News is a good one. Climate One podcast is another really good one. I'll leave some links below on different locations that you can get climate news on. So that's a way that we are similar, that environmentalists and Tea Party people are similar, because they can't really go to their mainstream media sources. I will say I think that's for different reasons why they can't go to the main media sources, but I digress. Yes, and page 29 was where we had the 7% of the population are climate change deniers. 7%. It's nothing. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. What are some other points? I mean, those are the main things that we want to talk about this time. If there's any other points, if you read the chapters, and if there's any other points that you would like to discuss in the comments below, please do. And I will definitely respond to you, and we'll continue this dialogue, because I think it's really interesting, and I would love to have some more voices in this conversation. And
what chapter should we read for next week?
Thank you, Mom. Thank you. This is why she's here. She's keeping me
Go
straight.
to the table of contents. 4 through 7 was pretty good.
Yeah, 4 through 7 was a good amount. So that was page 17 through 35. So that's about, I can't math how many pages. That's 18 pages.
Okay.
Okay, so then the next one, I think we're going to do chapters 8 through 11. Yeah, chapters 8 through 11. So that's the next 4 chapters.
It's a good book.
It's a good book. Highly recommend, seriously.
Yeah.
I think even if climate change isn't your biggest focus, it talks a lot about biases and the media biases and how that is something that needs to be figured out in the way of allowing ourselves to think more about issues individually and be able to make decisions for ourselves. And I'm just rambling at this point. We're going to go watch the debate now and eat dinner. Thank you so much for if you're watching this at any time. Thank you. I'm just going to leave it unedited pretty much. I know it's not perfect, but it's the way it's going to be. And vote and talk about the climate every day. And I will see you all on Monday. Okay, bye.